That's fine too.
Yeah,
As long as it doesn't steer it down the wrong path.
no.
We're good.
Well, I'll stay on point.
Welcome to Shawn White's Guide to Life.
That was a creepy cough, no offense.
Oh, mine?
Yeah,
Oh.
that was rough. It was like, and it was right when I was hitting record, and I was like, damn.
Do you want me to start rolling into it?
Yeah.
So I've touched on some of the massage stuff in an earlier episode, but I want to go in a little bit more detail about my experience. And as I've said before, my massage journey has been terrible up to the point to whenever I started my own business, and then it became good. And it started from even the very beginning, the absolute beginning of schooling. So I enroll in school, and I'm not going to say the school's name because it's not fair, but I would give them a D- if I was being really nice. And so whenever I enroll into school and I start, the first teacher that we have is this guy who wants to hear his own voice. And like the first day of class, he was like, I asked him, I said, so can you show us like what you do in your massage so we can get an idea of like what to do? He's like, well, you're just going to have to do it yourself. And I'm like, yeah, I thought we were here to learn. He's like, yeah, you're just going to have to do that on your own. I'm like, okay. And I start, and when I went to school, I was like, let's journal about every day, write down stuff that I think is neat, and keep track of what's going on.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing about like the first day is that teacher, we were doing, like, he didn't do any hands-on, but he wanted to, so he instructed some of us to do some hands-on. And on the first day, there was a student, a male student who was on the table. And he was like, now this student here, this is a really great opportunity. Just look at his muscles and just see how sexy his muscles are. This is really good for you guys to look at. And he's like ooh and awe about his muscles and like describing him in a sexualized way. And I'm like, this is not appropriate.
Ew.
We all know this is not appropriate. And I took note of it. And then throughout, whenever a student would have a question, he would in turn say, well, if you read your book, you wouldn't be asking this question. Now, one of the problems with the school system, at least with this school, is you don't start in like an introductory class, as you would in any other training program. You start where you start, and it's a rotating mod. And in this time, we started in like the third mod. So we were discussing some of the more advanced A&P stuff, anatomy and physiology. And one of the students, she didn't know what a cell was. Now, we all take for granted our, a pretty decent education and even if it was a garbage education when we went to school, most everyone knows what a cell is. But if you don't know what a cell is and you're studying what neurons are, and you ask what's a neuron, and your teacher says, well, it's you would know that if you read your book, it's really hard to learn because she didn't understand. She thought a cell and a neuron were different. And when I realized that she didn't get it, I was like, okay, I said, neurons and are cells. And she's like, well, I don't get it. I go, okay, you're a baker, right? And she's like, yeah. And then the teacher goes, I am the teacher here. I will explain it to her. And I'm like, jeez. In my brain, I'm like, you're not explaining it to her. But I'm not going to defy him. I'm going to follow the rules. And then he's like, well, a neuron. And he starts, he's like, it's connected to the brain and goes all throughout the body. And it sends out, helps the body know what's going on, helps you move. It controls your body that way. And I'm getting the super simplified version, explanation. But we all know what nerves are.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, but what about a cell? And he's like, well, a nerve is a cell. And she's like, I don't get it. And eventually he's like, well, just go home and read your book and you'll get it. And I'm like, well, I could help explain it to her in a way she'll get it. And he's like, no. And I'm like, okay. So we go on break and I go out there and I'm like, okay, so now we're away from him. So you're a baker. And she's like, yeah. I go, okay. So cells are basically like all the little, ingredient particulates. And there are different kinds of ingredient particulates that are important in order to have the recipe. And you have to have a very specific combination of everything in order for you to make brownies. If you change even a single ingredient, it's not brownies anymore. She's like, okay, so what's a nerve? I'm like, well, okay, so a nerve is a cell. It's a kind of ingredient. All right, so you can have all sorts of, there's all different types of cells. But right now we're just talking about the nerves being, like the neuron is a cell of the nervous system. And she's like, oh, I get it now. Mm-hmm. And and that pattern continued throughout the course. Anytime a student had a question, he would say, well, you need to be data mining. You need to be studying, and never actually helped any of the students ever whatsoever. Mm-hmm. Sometimes in class, he would go into diatribes explaining, like, there'd be like a girl who doesn't show up one day. And he would be like, well, you know why the girls aren't here, right? And I'm like, I don't even know, like, why? And he goes like, because they're on their period. Girls don't like to come to school when they're on their period. And I'm like, dude, how do you even know that? And like, why are you saying that to me right now? And then there was another time whenever another student came into class, and she's like, I don't feel well. I don't want to do hands-on massage today. And she's like, and he says, you have to do hands-on massage. She's like, I feel sick. I feel like I'm going to throw up. And he goes, well, are you pregnant? And she's like, what? And he goes, because if you're pregnant, you have to tell me. You have to tell me if you're pregnant. She's like, no, I just don't feel well. And, then there'd be all sorts of weird comments he would make that were not appropriate whenever during class. Some of the times he would I know he'd make like weird racial statements and stuff like that. Jeez. And use profanities, stuff that a teacher shouldn't be saying in a classroom. And later on, it came to the point where I'm not learning. No one's learning. I hate coming to school, and the whole experience is just being garbage because, like, nothing has happened. I'm not learning anything. I could read a book and teach myself everything that I need to know. I need to know hands-on stuff. I need the guidance of a more experienced massage therapist in order to show me how to succeed. And so I reached this point where I'm like, okay, I'm not learning, and something has to be done. I'm spending a lot of money for this program. What do I do? Okay, we're going to send him an email, and I'm going to tell him specifically, this is what you're doing. This is what's inhibiting my ability to learn. If you change these things, I will be able to succeed. Well, he gets really angry. And mind you, I break it down. I break it down to very specific instances and dates and all that stuff. And so when I come into the class the next day, he's like, Shawn, I printed off your email. I want you to read it to the class. And I'm like, well, that's private. He's like, you're going to read it. So I'm like, okay, you want me to read it? So I begin to read it out loud. And then he begins to question it. And then he tries to get the other students to question it. And once they start coming to, like, when they get to the racial slurs, when he starts talking about the girls and why they don't come into school and all this other crazy stuff that he was doing, they start, saying, why are you saying this stuff? Why do you think this is okay? This is not okay. And then he's, at that point, he ends up like threatening me. And then like all the students end up like, leaving the classroom. And I leave as well because I'm so pissed off because, this guy, it's just a terrible environment. And so the next day I go to the administrator. I bring with them the journal that I had been taking every day since the class had begun, and I file a formal complaint. And, then they're like, then at that point, they interrogate me for 3 hours. It's 3 people interrogating me, like asking me question after question after question after question. And I get it. But then at the end of it, they're like, well, Mr. White, what do you expect what kind of disciplinary action are you expecting today? I said, well, disciplinary action. She's like, yeah, what do you expect to happen to your teacher due to this? And I said, well, nothing short of his resignation or termination. And they're like, all right, Mr. White. And so, and then a couple of days, then he's not there for about a day or two, and then he resigns. Now, you would think that would be like, okay, now we're going into something that's better, right? You go from that teacher, the school is going to be smart enough in order to bring on teachers that actually do their job. People are actually passionate about the job in order to do some kind of like recovery, but they don't. They end up bringing in like another teacher who won't teach. Like you in massage school, you have to go through the reproductive system. You have to go through all the systems. And, whenever you have students who don't know what a cell is, it's wise to make sure that they know everything. Well, this teacher was so embarrassed about the reproductive system, he refused to teach it. And then the other instructor would sleep during like probably 25% of the class. And then he would bring in movies and stuff. I'm like, what is this? What is this? This is insane. And then when we would actually get assignments, I would crush it, right? I would crush every test. I would get like awesome grades. Other students would miss the test. And then they let them retake them. Or other students would fail utterly. And then they'd let them retake the test. They would fail utterly again. Then they'd take the same test, open book, and they would still fail. And then sometimes they would even just leave out the answers to the test on a table while they're in the room after while taking the test again. Mm-hmm. Now, you would say, well, Shawn, why won't you report this? Well, I tell you what, when you've already stood up to these people doing and try to make a change, what can you do? And what can you do if the institution is promoting its own students to cheat and don't care about their education? What am I going to do? I've already put up my fight. And all the while, unbeknownst to me, I'm dying during this time. Because whenever I'm going through school, the cancer inside of my body is eating me alive. And I just feel like it's absolute pain all the time, but I'm still pushing and driving forward. I was dying whenever I stood up to that teacher. And I was dying whenever I was having to navigate the insanity of this, forcing myself. Like, thank God I have like incredible grit and force of will. And then, we get done with that portion of the schooling and we go into clinicals. And clinicals, you're supposed to get... What's that?
Before you get clinicals, you were talking about how you were pain the entire... Like when you're arguing with the guy and everything. What... Can you describe the pain? Please.
Yeah, so it's like... during that time, it felt like something was eating me alive. I had a hard time breathing. I would get exhausted really quickly. It always felt like I had some kind of... I don't know. There was like... oil inside of my lungs is kind of what it felt like. It always felt like I had the flu, but I wasn't nauseated. You know that like achy, like throbbing, roving, like that ick from the flu that you get? Mm-hmm. That was always. Okay. And that was what manifest. That was like what I was still able to like find. Like I could like... There's a point when pain becomes a norm and then it burns, simmers in the background. Mm-hmm. And I thought most of it was just anxiety, but really, the reality was the pain was so high that I thought I was going crazy, because to have to manage that pain level was driving me to my brink. And then you compound that with everything else that's happening at the same time. Yeah, it just, becomes impossible.
So you'd wake up in the morning, right? You'd wake up and you just feel like you have the flu with the aches and pains. And then you go about your day just without congestion, nose congestion, just like just oily coughs, like you say. Wow.
Yeah, and it would be like, but there's another sensation. It's really hard to articulate. It's like when you're sitting there, it feels like... deep in my spirit, it felt like there was like flies eating me from the inside out. And it was just always felt like there was a dark storm cloud of pain everywhere all the time. Wow. But you're just like, well, I don't know what this is, but I'll get better. And you just keep going forward. And then that scene where I, like just before clinicals had started, I started coughing up that blood. And then, of course, I went to the doctor, and they're like, you're not contagious. And I tell them about it. And then they're like, and I'm in clinicals, you're supposed to do a whole bunch of hours, but we didn't because the school doesn't care and there's no real hands-on training. If you're thinking about going to massage school, you need to really investigate the school, see how many actual hands-on hours, get a massage, maybe something from the instructors, make sure that they know what they're talking about, make sure that they're actually invested, make sure they're passionate and they love the industry. Like they want to change something. They want to give you an opportunity that they didn't have, because if they're not that way, they're going to destroy you. They're going to waste your money because the administration doesn't care. And if the teachers don't care, then you're doomed. And most massage therapists wash out after the first year. 50%, right around 50% of everyone who graduates is not there a year later. And so, like, whenever I was in school, I could barely breathe. I couldn't stand in one space without breaking out into a sweat.
Yeah, because you were talking about how you were struggling while you were trying to give massages in a previous episode. So.
Right, and they said, and I'm like, I need to sit because if I'm just running out of breath, I'm running out of energy, and I hurt so much. They're like, you can't sit. I'm like, dude, I am in so much pain. I need to sit and do my massage. They're like, you can't do it against the law. You can't do a massage when you're sitting. And I'm like, okay. So I would do it, and I would just be like rocked to the core with like feeling just so horrendous after every time that I would do a massage during clinicals. No empathy whatsoever. No empathy from any of these people. And mind you, whenever I went through clinicals, there's no guidance. Like, there's this thing that it's called draping. It's what helps you feel comfortable during a massage so that your modesty is protected. There was 1 hour that was given to us in the whole duration of my education about how to do draping. That is like, and so when you graduate and you go into the workforce, I just had to figure it out on my own because I wasn't taught.
Oh,
and when I say an hour, like that's like over the course of like the year training that I had. So just like an hour on body mechanics. And that's one of the most important skills that you need as a therapist, or else you will destroy your body. It's a very physically demanding profession. So if your school doesn't give you a tremendous, you're doomed. You're going to destroy your wrists, your back, your neck, your elbows. You're going to be in so much physical pain that you will end up actually injuring yourself and ruining your body for the rest of your life. And your career may be short-lived to the point where you might not be able to pay back your student loans because you wash back out in a year. You know, an education should at least pay for your student loans. Enough money to get there. And the system's just not designed that way. And the schools aren't ever held accountable. And the reason why they're not held accountable is because in the state of Missouri, we have the provisional license. The provisional license makes it so that when you graduate, you can practice up to a year without having to pass your state licensing exam. So what happens is this. You graduate. A lot of times they're pushing you not to take the test. Some other times they do, but most times in clinicals, all you're working on is practicing for that test when you should have been practicing for that test when you were in school, and clinicals should be focused on preparing you to enter the workforce. It's just not designed that way. They want you, and so their academic structure is so terrible that in the first 9 months of your training, it's not enough. And of course it's not enough because they promote cheating throughout the school system. Of course these people aren't good enough to pass the test because you're not invested in them in order to help them succeed. And I think that there's a certain role whenever you have teachers, especially in a trade, it is their responsibility to attempt to inspire the people they're mentoring, to show them an opportunity. Because a lot of people who are drawn to massage have never had that opportunity. And they're looking to showcase that beautiful, bright light that's in their soul. Because deeply, they want to help others make the most of every moment. But when you don't have that guide to help you make it through it, all they're doing is setting you up for failure and for a broken heart and hurting hands, wrists, and elbows and back. And so it's just a really sad experience to watch that happen. So these, you're not prepared. I wasn't really prepared. Back to the provisional license. So what happens is you end up having these people fail their licensing exam and never try to do it again. And then they reach the 12 months and then they're done. Now, the schools are never held accountable because they're a trade school, and trade schools typically have like a required placement percentage that they have to meet, right? Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Okay. They're guaranteed placement. And the reason is because that washout rate in massage therapy is so high. It doesn't matter if you're a crappy massage therapist, you're getting a job because everyone needs massage therapists. So you graduate, you don't have the skills to protect yourself. You don't have the skills to do a good massage. And so that means that your retention's not going to be very good when it comes to customers. And you're going to hurt yourself progressively over and over and over and over. And you're nervous all the time because you weren't trained properly in order to have confidence to do your job professionally, to do it in a way that would allow you to excel. So the schools are never held accountable because that percentage is always high with placement because of the provisional license. Mm-hmm. It's just a mess. It's a mess of a system. We need to get rid of that provisional license and make it so that if you cannot do the job, you can't do the job. What's the purpose of a license? If you can go a year without taking the test. That test should be the minimum requirement to practice. And so many therapists can't even pass it. And you'd be like, well, Shawn, it's their drive. Well, maybe, but but I've seen so many passionate people, like the girl who was a baker in class. If she just had someone who cared and walked her through the steps without belittling her and belittling her intelligence, maybe she could have become something phenomenal. Mm-hmm. But she didn't, and she didn't make her way. Just like so many other people in my industry. So that's a little bit of a crash course there on some of my experience in the good old massage world. Now, whenever I graduated, I got a job, just like everyone got a job. But I am really good at what I do. And then after graduating, I went through. I worked for a little bit, and then I had my surgery, and the surgery definitely put a kibosh on the the whole traveling forward thing.